When you think of Motown's golden era, you think of the hits, the songs that lit up the dance floors, top charts, and became a soundtrack of a generation. But behind those smooth vocals and catchy hooks was a powerhouse trio pulling all the strings. Holland Dozier Holland, made up of Brian Holland, Lamont Dozier, and Eddie Holland. This songwriting and production team crafted the very sound that made Motown a global phenomenon. From the Supremes' Baby Love to the Four Tops' Reach Out and I'll Be There, their fingerprints were nearly on every major hit of the mid-1960s. They were the architects of the Motown movement, shaping how black music sounded, felt, and was received across America and beyond. Their creative chemistry was really unmatched. Brian Holland, the rhythm and structure. Lamont focused on the melody and arrangements, and Eddie refined the lyrics and vocal delivery. Together they wrote and produced a staggering number of hits, responsible for over 75% of Motown's chart toppers during their peak. But success came at a cost. Despite building the label's sonic identity, HDH found themselves in a battle over royalties and recognition. And in 1968, at the height of their power, they walked away from Motown. It was a move that shocked the industry and exposed deeper tension behind the label's polished image. But it also proved one thing. They didn't just make hits for Motown. They were the hits. Even though I wasn't around when these songs first dropped, the impact of Holland Dozier Holland is impossible to ignore. You can hear their influence in everything from modern R&B to pop. I mean, it really blows my mind how three people could shape a whole era of music like that and then walk away on principle alone. That's legendary to me. This video dives deep into the rise, reign, and departure of Holland Dozier Holland, the trio that turned soul into pop and made Motown legendary. Get ready to discover the untold story of the dream team behind Motown's dream. Yo, what's going on, guys? This is Kanoa Speaks. We diving into the archives to bring you the moments from history that shaped the R&B and soul genres. Let's get it. Before they became legends, Brian Holland, Lamont Dozier, and Eddie Holland were three young Detroit musicians trying to find their voices in a crowded and competitive scene. Each had talent individually. They were writers, producers, and singers, but together they would form one of the most influential creative teams in the history of popular music. Brian Holland, a piano prodigy with a sharp ear for rhythm and structure, had already been dabbling in songwriting and production for Motown in its earliest days. He was joined by Lamont Dozier, a fellow Detroiter with a gift for melody and arrangements. Eddie Holland, Brian's older brother, was initially brought on as a singer. He'd even recorded a few solo records for Motown, but found his true strength in crafting lyrics and coaching vocal delivery in the studio. Each man filled a specific creative lane. Brian built the musical skeletons, Lamont dressed them in melody and groove, and Eddie gave them a soul by shaping the lyrics and the vocal tone. That balance became the formula, and they actually clicked. Berry Gordy, always on the lookout for hitmakers, quickly saw their potential. He gave them room to experiment, and their early successes like Heat Wave by Martha and the Vandellas and Mickey's Monkey by The Miracles started to catch fire. But these were only previews of what was to come. By the early 1960s, the trio was officially writing and producing under the Motown umbrella. And as the Motown machine gained momentum, HDH was placed at its very core. The label's assembly line approach to music production was efficient, but what made it magical was the emotion, the hooks, and the polish that Holland Dozier Holland brought to every track they touched. And they worked relentlessly, crafting multiple songs in a day, guiding artists through take after take after take until they captured the perfect sound. They fused gospel, doo-wop, and R&B into a slick, radio-ready blend that became known as the Motown sound. In a world where many black musicians struggled to break through to mainstream audiences, HDH were creating crossover smashes. And it wasn't long before their names and their records would climb in the charts, one after another. This chapter marks the birth of a songwriting brotherhood that would define a generation and set the foundation for a run of hits that would rival any in music history. What really stands out to me here about this part of their journey is how organic and genuine their creative partnership really was. It wasn't like they were just, thrown together by some executive or forced to collaborate just for the sake of business, right? They just naturally found their rhythm as a team. Each one of them had a gift, but instead of competing with one another, they leaned into what really made the other stronger. That kind of unspoken trust and balance is really, really powerful, especially in an industry that thrives on ego. It says a lot about their humility, for one. They weren't chasing the spotlight like a lot of producers or writers do today. They were focused on the craft. They were focused on making sure the music had heart and structure and soul. That's what made their songs timeless, I believe. And even though they were behind the scenes, their influence was louder than most frontmen. For me, it's a reminder that greatness doesn't always have to shout, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes it just works quietly in the background, and it changes everything. Once Holland Dozier Holland found their rhythm, Motown was never the same. From 1963 to 1967, the trio went on an unprecedented hot streak, delivering hit after hit after hit that shaped not only the Motown sound, but also the entire direction of American pop and soul music. At the center of this explosion were the Supremes and the Four Tops, two groups whose careers would be forever defined by the HDH touch. Let's start with the Supremes. Before HDH took the reins, the group had struggled to find traction. They were even jokingly referred to around Motown as the no-hit Supremes, but that changed almost overnight with Where Did Our Love Go in 1964. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and suddenly the Supremes were unstoppable. Now, I did a video the other day where I said Where Did Our Love Go was originally intended to be for Martha and the Vandellas. A commenter had pointed out that was wrong. So shout out to you, sir. It was originally supposed to be the Marvelettes, I believe. So yeah, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, shout out to you, sir. Thank you. What followed Where Did Our Love Go was a string of 5 consecutive #1 singles, all crafted by Holland Dozier Holland. Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop in the Name of Love, and Back in My Arms Again. These records were polished, precise, and packed with signature elements. Foot-stomping rhythms, call-and-response vocals, and urgent hooks. Diana Ross's voice floated effortlessly over HDH's production, turning Teenage Heartbreak into chart-topping gold. But HDH weren't one-group wonders. Enter the Four Tops, one of Motown's powerhouse male quartets, led by the rich baritone of Levy Stubbs. While the Supremes brought elegance and softness, the Four Tops embodied raw emotion and strength. With HDH at the helm, the group exploded with hits like Baby I Need Your Lovin', I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, and Reach Out I'll Be There. Reach Out in particular was a creative high point, dramatic, cinematic, and infused with soul. It stretched beyond the standard Motown formula. The track's orchestration, vocal urgency, and unusual phrasing made it one of Motown's most iconic and enduring songs. It topped the charts and became an anthem of reassurance in turbulent times. What made HDH stand out was their ability to tailor songs to an artist's strengths. For Martha and the Vandellas, they gave rhythm-driven dance numbers like Nowhere to Run. For Marvin Gaye, they provided early solo hits like How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You. Each song was custom fit, never cookie cutter. Meanwhile, inside Motown's legendary Studio A, the trio were clocking in long hours, pushing for perfection. They worked closely with the Funk Brothers, the label's house band, to shape every drum beat, bass line, and piano riff. Nothing was left to chance, and yet their songs never felt forced. By 1967, it was estimated that Holland Dozier Holland were responsible for nearly 75% of Motown's chart-topping hits. They were a machine, yes, but one powered by soul, precision, and genius. This was HDH at their peak, turning every idea into gold, crafting the soundtrack of a decade, and proving that 3 men behind the curtain could redefine what pop music could really be. What blows my mind about this era is how HDH could consistently tap into emotion while still making records that were commercially unbeatable. That balance ain't easy. Either you're too deep for the mainstream or you're too pop to feel personal. But they hit that sweet spot every single time. It's wild to think how they took the Supremes from the no-hit list to global stardom almost overnight. That kind of turnaround doesn't happen without vision and precision. And with the Four Tops, they were full-blown anthems that held weight. On Reach Out, I'll Be There, the urgency in Levy Stubbs' voice, the way the music builds like it's carrying a message that has to be heard. That's not production, that's storytelling. I think what inspires me the most is how HDH tailored every song to fit the artist rather than forcing the artist to fit a certain mold or a formula. Now that's real artistry. They were creating timeless moments, and in doing so, they helped shape the identity of an entire generation. As Motown grew into a musical empire during the mid-1960s, the image presented to the world was clean, unified, and unstoppable. But beneath the polished exterior, creative tensions and contractual conflicts were quietly brewing. While HDH had become the label's most successful production team, they remained, by contract, staff songwriters and producers bound to Motown's flat-rate pay structure. That pretty much meant that even though they were creating millions of dollars worth of hit records, they weren't sharing in the massive royalties or ownership that came with their success. In fact, at the height of their run, the trio was pulling in a modest weekly salary compared to the revenues their songs were generating. But they wanted more than just recognition. They wanted the kind of influence that matched their impact. They were writing nearly all the major hits, building artists' identities, and defining Motown's sound, yet they had no control over publishing, which was all retained under Berry Gordy's Joe Beat Music. Tensions escalated behind the scenes, too, and they were expected to keep delivering chart toppers without missing a beat. But they began to feel like cogs in a machine that they had essentially built themselves. The Motown model was efficient, kind of like a musical assembly line where writers wrote, producers produced, and performers performed. But it left little room for negotiation or ownership. And then came the turning point. Berry Gordy began shifting his focus to expanding Motown into television and film, particularly with Diana Ross at the forefront. The Supremes were increasingly viewed as a vehicle for Gordy's broader ambitions, and HDH found themselves subtly being pushed out of the creative driver's seat, even with the very artists that they helped elevate themselves. Things started getting a lot more frustrating when Berry Gordy began delaying royalty payments, particularly for their international sales. HDH felt not only underpaid, but undervalued. and they started to question whether staying at Motown was even sustainable or even worth it, really. During all this internal turmoil, the hits never stopped. Songs like You Keep Me Hanging On, Love Is Here, Now You're Gone, and Bernadette continued to dominate the charts. But even in the perfection of their productions, there was now a sense of tension in the lyrics. Songs about feeling trapped, misunderstood, or emotionally drained. Some have even suggested that those themes mirrored what was going on with their own growing discontent. By late 1967, the working relationship between Holland Dozier Holland and Berry Gordy was strained into its breaking point. They stopped submitting new material, meetings became confrontational, and trust was eroding. The machine they helped build was now pushing back against them, and they were faced with a choice. Keep writing under a system that exploited their genius, or walk away at the height of their influence. In early 1968, the inevitable happened. Holland Dozier Holland officially left Motown. It wasn't a quiet exit. The trio's decision sent shockwaves through the music industry and left a noticeable gap at the very heart of Motown's hit-making engine. For a label that prided itself on order and discipline, this was a major disruption. And for Gordy, it was personal because they were the architects of his label's sound, responsible for many of Motown's biggest records. Their departure threatened not only Motown's creative momentum, but also its internal reputation for unity and control. HDH sued Motown for unpaid royalties and control of their publishing rights. Motown countered, accusing them of breach of contract. For years, both sides were locked in a bitter courtroom battle with millions of dollars and reputations on the line. But even as all of this was playing out, HDH didn't retreat quietly. They immediately founded their own labels, Invictus Records and Hot Wax Records, and they proved just how powerful they were outside of the Motown machine. Free from the restraints of Gordy's system, and they began writing and producing for a new generation of artists, including people like Frida Payne, or Chairman of the Board, or Honeycomb. In 1970, they released Frida Payne's Band of Gold, a haunting soul pop single that became a global hit. That same year, Chairman of the Board's Gimme Just a Little More Time broke the top 10. They were charting at a time when Motown itself was trying to recover from the absence of its key hitmakers. HDH had shown that they were the brand, not just the background players. Still, though, the loss was felt deeply on both sides. For Motown, it was replacing the unique synergy of Holland Dozier Holland. It proved really difficult because although other songwriters had stepped up, including people like Norman Whitfield and Ashford and Simpson, there was a noticeable shift in Motown's sound. The label leaned more into the psychedelic soul and conceptual albums in the 1970s. And that it really broadened their musical range, but the crisp crossover appeal that HDH brought to that era had never quite been replicated. For the trio, the success at Invictus and Hot Wax was meaningful, but it came with new challenges. They had full creative control, right? But now they were business owners. Now they were navigating distribution, radio politics, and label management. The hits still came, yeah, but the volume wasn't quite what it had been at Motown. They were legends, but now they were also the outlaws. Years later, when both parties would eventually settle their disputes, the damage had already been done, and it shifted the course of Motown. HDH's departure signaled the end of Motown's first golden era. Yet, in stepping away, Holland Dozier Holland did something that few others had dared to do. They walked away from the machine that they built, reclaimed their power, and proved that their magic didn't belong to any one label. It came from within. To me, this part of the story really hits hard because HDH were the heartbeat of Motown during those golden years. I can't imagine what it must have been like, or what it must have felt like to watch the empire you helped build start taking you for granted. It's the classic tale of the genius behind the curtain getting overlooked while everybody else soaks in the glory. Their courage to walk away, especially at the time where they were at the top of their game, was really wild to me because most people would have stayed. Most people would have kept their heads down and kept cashing checks, but they chose to bet on themselves. They chose to be themselves, and that's something that I respect deeply. I also think that it's kind of poetic how their songs started reflecting their own struggle. Like it was like a cry for freedom wrapped inside of a danceable hook or something. And when they launched Invictus and Hot Wax, they didn't just survive, they thrived. It proved that their genius wasn't tied to any logo or label, specifically. I think that that's what makes their legacy even more powerful. They were a force that reshaped music, and when the machine couldn't contain them anymore, they built a new one. That's the kind of defiance that's inspiring, especially in music. That kind of innovation that births a whole new era. And especially for creatives who feel boxed in by the systems that they work under. Even decades after the departure from Motown, the fingerprints of Holland Dozier Holland are everywhere in pop, soul, and R&B music. Their songwriting set standards, and what they created was a blueprint for how to craft a hit that could touch both the hearts and the dance floor. At the core of their formula was their deep understanding of emotion. Their lyrics captured the universal themes of love, heartbreak, longing, and resilience, but never were really overly complex. Instead, their strength came from their clarity, their rhythm, and their repetition. Lines like "Stop in the Name of Love" or "You Keep Me Hanging On" or "Baby, I Need Your Lovin'," they all hit hard because they were instantly relatable and easy to sing along to. They turned simple expressions into hooks that lodged themselves into the listener's memory after just one listen. Their work influenced producers like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Babyface, and Bruno Mars, all of whom carried forward that legacy of lush production with emotional storytelling. Critics and fans alike recognize their genius today, but it took a whole lot of time. For years, they were the invisible architects behind the stars. Yet now they're widely credited as some of the most important American songwriters of the 20th century. They were inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and their songs continue to earn new life in films, commercials, covers, everything. Their sound was a blend of gospel urgency, pop flair, and R&B soul. But the magic wasn't in the ingredients. It was in the architecture of the songs that they created. HDH could take pain and make it sing. They could turn heartbreak into a hit, and they did it so consistently it looked effortless. And what blows me away about them is how their work still feels current. Even in those songs that are decades old, you can play something like "You Can't Hurry Love" today and it still hits just as hard. You know what I'm saying? That's not nostalgia. That's timeless craftsmanship. That's artistry. I think that really says a lot, that they didn't rely on flashy trends or gimmicks. You know, they built their songs on pure emotion and song structure. And that's why their music holds up. And personally, I've admired how HDH knew how to leave space in their productions. You know, that's not easy, because sometimes the most powerful thing in a track is what you don't hear. And they mastered that. Every snare hit, every string line, every background vocal, everything had its purpose. And it's something I think a lot of modern producers could still learn from. Their legacy is proof that real emotion, honest songwriting, and great instincts never really go out of style. They defied an era and they set the gold standard. And honestly, I think we're still chasing it. In the 2000s, the digital age brought a resurgence of interest in their catalog. Documentaries, tribute albums, and streaming services introduced a new generation to the music of HDH, proving that the appeal of their work wasn't limited to just one era. Songs like "Baby Love," "You Keep Me Hanging On," and "Reach Out, I'll Be There" began charting on curated playlists, in movies and in television shows, and what had once been background sound for dance halls and jukeboxes was now echoing through earbuds and film scores and streaming services. You see how the influence, it'll still find a way to drip into different generations and drip into different eras. When Lamont Dozier passed away in 2022, the music world mourned deeply. Tributes poured in from legends like Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross to young artists like Questlove and Bruno Mars. It was a reminder that while the trio may have once been hidden behind the curtain, their influence had stretched far beyond that. In the end, Holland Dozier Holland were Motown's dream team. Their songs defined an era, an entire generation, and the echoes of their work will continue to shape the sound of soul, pop, and R&B for generations to come. But check this out. Before becoming the lead singer of Martha and the Vandellas, Martha Reeves was a secretary at Motown. One day, a singer missed a recording session and she jumped in to cut a demo. That moment sparked her career. Click here to learn how it all unfolded, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.